numbers and emails from residents as we possibly can, so that we're better prepared come March, April, May to really keep everybody in the loop. And also, you're going to see some communication about wanting to find anybody that wants to get more involved, that really wants to participate at a deeper level. So that's what we're doing right now. And then as we get to March and April, the city will start to put their stamp on the process. We'll all be very active. We'll, we're going to be the ones that are providing input, but the format or the structure will be coming from the city for the most part. So one of the things that came up when Amanda and Naomi were getting us all together was that, these neighborhood plans are pretty new in their current format within the planning initiative. But there have been 3 of them completed now. 2 or 3, Naomi?
3.
3 of them completed now, and they're difficult to get through. If any of you have tried to get through the East or the other 2 plans, it's a daunting task. And for those of us that are lay people, that just makes it that much more difficult. So that's why this idea of having Naomi walk us through the plan kind of gets that process going more quickly. We get the benefit of her expertise, her input, and then hopefully most of us will spend some additional time after the fact, after we've gotten her briefing, to go through it in a more detailed fashion. And then we'll have a much better idea of where we're going, what a plan looks like, and that should better inform the Near Northwest plan. James, am I missing anything? Are you?
No, that was good. I apologize. My bandwidth is not very good right now, so
okay.
I shut down my videos. But I did make Naomi a co-host, so she should be able to rock and roll with her presentation.
Cool. Well, without further ado, I think you all know Naomi. And Naomi, thank you very much for giving up part of your evening to go through this for us.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Good to see some faces I haven't seen in a while. So I'm going to, you are right, you're lucky that you went second, because I've even learned some things in between being at Highland United Neighbor Inc. and coming here. So I've got a little bit more info. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, start this presentation, and then I will actually, you know what, based on what I learned recently, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and going to the main landing page, the homepage that the city still has up for the East Area Plan, because it was realized that I downloaded this plan and I have a presentation about the plan, and there's supplemental materials that are super important to the plan and a little bit more digestible, and those are actually available on the website. So let's go. All righty. Okay, so here, this is why I want to point this out to begin with. So under community planning and development, planning and design, neighborhood planning subsections, you finally get to the individual plans. For some reason, there's usually a picture of and this is a link to downloading the main plan. So if you haven't downloaded it yet and want to look at it, usually it appears as a picture. I don't know why it's broken right now. But one thing that's very interesting is that actually in this drop down here, this is where you can get this is where the goodies are. So here is another link to downloading the full PDF of the East Area Plan. But then there's these 3 other supplemental materials, appendices. So the implementation matrix, this one I think is the most important. The other ones are kind of interesting, especially if you want to nerd out and get a little academic. The measurable goals methodology talks about how the city, so the numbers and the metrics that you see in the plan later, it actually lays out what they're talking about and what their methodology is. And then this briefing book supplement, I'm actually not even really sure what that is. But the implementation matrix, oh my gosh, the controls. popped down for there we go, come on. Okay, so in the plan, there's the plans themselves are made up of kind of three different like chunks of information that's presented over and over again in different categories and in different ways, but it really talks about existing conditions. So there's a lot of analysis of, you know, where streets are, what safety is like, a huge broad number of metrics that they measure. And then they talk about kind of broad like value statements and possible solutions for moving forward. And then there's the real like meat of the plans are these individual policy recommendations. So as you'll see when we go into the plan is 255 pages long. And what I've realized since then is that some of these policies that are listed out are actually listed multiple times in the plan, because in a way they're just organized into different buckets. So it's more of kind of a way for you to sort through and say, hey, where are the things that are specific to this neighborhood? And where are the things that are specific to housing equity? And so you can go to those parts of the plan, but there may be policies that like belong in both of those buckets. So if you want just a nice table, a nice raw list of what all the policy recommendations actually are in the plan, that's what this implementation matrix has. And what's also really useful about this is that it tells you what the time frame may be, if this is a near-term thing, if this is a super long-term thing that's going to take massive coordination with like federal agencies, state agencies. And then it also lays out who the lead would be at the city. So if it's community planning and development or RTD, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DOTI here, housing stability. So I actually think this, and this is I think this is like 20 pages, 21 pages. I think this is almost the most important thing, aside from the nice graphics and nice layout of the plan. This is really the meat and potatoes of it. So recommend looking at this. Again, you can download it from the main landing page for the plan there. But I was excited I'd remembered that this existed, and then one of the planners reminded me of it. So I'm glad that I could share that with everybody. So now we will jump back and I will show you my presentation on the East Area Plan. And no, I'm not flipping through all 255 pages with you because that would be torture. I'm not insane. So adopted November 16th, 2020, very recent. I think we've all been kind of aware of, you know, there are controversies and the big hurdles that the planning process went through. But what I wanted to share with you all today is really just to break down the document and make it more accessible, and not really go into, you know, whether or not the recommendations are good, but really just what the structure of this is. Like, what can we expect our plan to look like when it gets published? Like, what is all this work we're doing going to look like? So I credit one of my high school professors with teaching me to always read the table of contents and actually take a lot of information out of it. So that's kind of, I've sort of structured this presentation really by the table of contents, because it actually is super, super important. It is the organizing principle and tells you a lot about what the plan does and how it's organized. So we're going to go through, first of all, the introduction and what all is in there, what useful information is in there, what maybe a little bit of fluff is in there. Secondly, come the area-wide recommendations. So, you know, we know that there are 4 pretty unique neighborhoods that are combined into the planning process for the small area plans. And the reason that they're doing that is really for expedience, because if every single neighborhood had their own individual process, it would take like 50 years for us to have plans. So they are grouping 4 of us together and looking at it cohesively, because, you know, there are borders, but there also aren't. They're very permeable. So this second chapter here, or the second section, is about area-wide recommendations. So we'll walk through what's in there. And then in every plan, after the area-wide recommendations, you're going to get to the neighborhood-specific recommendations. So starting here, and by the way, this chapters like 1 and 2 take up the bulk of the plan. It's almost more than half. So when we do get to the neighborhoods, you'll see it's kind of towards the end, but there is very special attention paid to tweaking the recommendations in the rest of the plan and applying them very specifically to each neighborhood. So it will be neighborhoods like just recommendations for Sunnyside, just recommendations for Chaffee Park. So that will be reflected in the plan. And then interestingly, at the very end, in East Colfax, they have Colfax. The East Area Plan has Colfax. It's such a distinct, large organizing principle for that whole area that they actually have an entire chapter that's just dedicated to Colfax. I don't know if we're going to get that. Maybe an equivalent would be federal, or maybe it would be something else. That's where the wiggle room is in this structure. So there is structure that every plan kind of looks like, but then there is room for that for things that are specific to each area. So let's get going. So in the introduction, and again, you can kind of see how the plan, it goes from really, really the wider perspective down to the more and more granularity. So in the introduction, it kind of places like where this area is in all of Denver. And it also has some really important statements in the introduction area about how plans work, how this plan will interact with other plans, how the small area plans fit in with the big area plans. And this quote here, which I took out, because I think we're all always struggling a little bit to understand what small area plans do and what they don't do. So I think this sums it up kind of well. It's a day-to-day decision-making guide, really. It's a guide to how the city should act in terms of regulating land use, public investment, private developments, and partnership. So there's a little bit more information on the next couple of pages. So what I've highlighted here is that the plan serves as a supplement to the comprehensive plan. So it takes the citywide visions that are in Comprehensive Plan 2040 and in Blueprint Denver, and it applies them and tweaks them and specifies them so that they appropriately fit these neighborhoods. And it's not just that super broad brush. And then over here also, it mentions that it's a high level framework to guide and influence decisions, and that these plans are consistent with and further the policies and recommendations in the citywide plans, so they can't go against them. They can refine them, but they can't undo them. And I think an example we usually use is like ADUs. So it is a policy citywide that ADUs are a good thing that we want to go towards. So in a small area plan, you're not going to see a policy that says ADUs are banned in our neighborhood. That would be going against citywide policy recommendations. But maybe we'll see a policy that's like, when ADUs are approved, they should do X, Y, and Z, or like maybe they should look a certain way, or we should examine ways to make them fit in better with the neighborhood or something like that. So a little bit more in the introduction. The other kind of big section of the introduction is this huge piece on equity. And this is a concept introduced by Blueprint Denver that's going to be in every single plan. So this is going to be in our plan. They have these set parameters for measuring equity that are going to be used as a lens for all the plans and all the neighborhoods and a lot of the decisions that are made about it. And all that is set up in the introduction. So you'll also see like they actually do this equity analysis for the different neighborhoods, which will play into recommendations later. All right, so then we get into area-wide recommendations. There's like, this is chapter 2, but there's chapter like 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3. And that's because these are kind of the set categories. So for area-wide recommendations, the first set category is land use and built form. And in this section, these things here, these subchapters are also very preset, because what they're going to talk about is stuff that again is established in Blueprint Denver. So things like the neighborhood contexts, Blueprint Denver places, growth strategy and stuff, that's all kind of passed down from Blueprint Denver, but this is how it's being applied to this area. So just a few examples. Future places. describes very broadly how high buildings should be and how they're mapped in the area, if there are community benefits that should be associated with greater heights. There's illustrations and things like that. Again, this isn't zoning, it's not like a rezoning, but it would be a guide to make future decisions about zoning, whether it's a one-off or legislative. Again, the growth strategy, that's all about citywide metrics on how much our population is going to grow and how all the neighborhoods need to respond to that. And then zoning recommendations, which is my personal favorite chapter, really gets into kind of the nitty-gritty about what future policy things we could do to make land use regulation better in these areas. So like, for instance, I know, Bill, I think you were talking about the overlay at the beginning when I popped in. And so guidance towards saying, hey, we should develop an overlay for this or that, or like this specific recommendations down there of encouraging to maintain rather than demolish existing homes. Like those are very like specific direction and guidance that would go into this area in the plan. Future places, again, this is from Blueprint Denver. I don't think I'll go super deep into it, but it does also tie into zoning. It is not a land use decision, but it does shape where we want to have a community center, or where this is the shopping street, we want to have commercial on it, or this is more of a low impact residential area, mostly single unit homes. And so this stuff has been established in Blueprint Denver, but this is our opportunity. Our area plan is the opportunity to fix things or change things that we think they got wrong. Because again, when they did this mapping in Blueprint Denver, they had to do it at a very high level. And we've seen in some other council districts too, that they did get things wrong. Or for instance, through the process of going back to the community, people realized like, no, we don't want this to be just manufacturing. We want there to be homes here too, or stuff like that. So the decisions made in our planning process will actually lead to Blueprint Denver and these big maps being updated to reflect what this community wants. So second area-wide recommendation category, again, I'm pretty sure this is preset, is economy and housing. So this goes into things like affordable housing and social services. Oh, I don't have examples of that. Community serving retail. I do believe these subchapters, these aren't preset. These come out of discussions with the community. So in these larger conversations in the planning process, these, five, well, not the introduction, but these kind of 4 buckets were what emerged from the conversations with the community as things they really wanted to focus on. So our plan may look a little different, or maybe we'll have these same categories, but that's just prompts that then there are specific recommendations about in that chapter. Mobility is the third category. This one's a pretty big one because again, this is a land use plan. It's a little, it's pretty wiggly. It incorporates a lot of things, but streets and right-of-way, bikes, just all that mobility stuff is definitely like the meat and potatoes of area plans. So this is a pretty big chapter. It's going to have a lot of data in it. So in these chapters, they're going to do tons of data analysis on the neighborhoods. They're going to show where crashes are, where high injury networks are. And they're going to identify what these transformative street opportunities, they'll put out suggestions, and then there'll be a conversation with the community about, is this the direction you'd like to go? Do you agree that this is a problem, or is it not? Is this the right solution? And then they'll even get into, so I think I like bringing up this picture because I think this actually points to a bit of confusion that the plan can cause, because you find things like this in this plan. This looks very specific, right? Like this is an intersection with models of where an improved intersection with striping and new crosswalks and stuff like that. But this plan is not going to make this happen. This is a vision. So that's why there's this caveat down at the bottom, which I like to make very large, which is that this is a drawing intended to help people visualize things, and it's illustrative only. But I would say a critique personally is that this can be confusing, because when you see things, I mean, visuals are super, super important, but when you see something like this, you could think that, oh, okay, well, this is the plan for how to fix this intersection. When are they going to start building it? And that's not what it's doing. It's actually it's still very high level envisioning, but it is setting the groundwork for future. I mean, the Department of Transportation is going to have to come in here and do their thing, because they didn't design this, but they're going to have to come in and design it. It's a whole separate process. So just differentiating between kind of the levels of detail that you may see and what they actually do. Same format goes on for things like sidewalks, public transit, traffic calming, etc. And then number 4 for area-wide recommendations is quality of life. And I think some of these are kind of preset or encouraged to think about. So obviously parks, recreation, open space, environmental quality, access to healthy food. But I imagine that, through the conversations in the planning process, if it turns out that our area is super passionate about these things, maybe this chapter is just going to be bigger, whereas maybe another chapter was bigger for a different planning area. Or maybe Sunnyside is super, super passionate about this. And then when we get to the Sunnyside chapter, their environmental quality of life thing that's like the biggest part of your chapter. So that's kind of, again, like where there's like where some wiggle room is. Again, this chapter, like a lot of other ones, will start with a bunch of data. There are specific metrics, again, like for this, like there was for the equity conversation and some other conversations. This is how the city is going to measure these things. It's measuring tree canopy, impervious surface, etc. This is just what one of these pages looks like. I don't think I showed that before, but this is what they look like for all the other chapters too. They're just different colors and different pictures. So you'll see policy recommendation A5, and it's in mobility, and it's all purple instead of green or something. But this is what the pages look like, kind of when you open them up and see where these recommendations and their sub-recommendations are. So I think this is why it can get a little confusing. There's a lot of like levels of bullet points here. Here's an environmental quality recommendation. So about increasing pervious surface coverage. And there's lots more maps and analysis and ideas. Certain pages will be called out with just kind of basic info on here's what best practices in addressing this topic is. So like this one talks about green streets and green infrastructure and things like that. And that's just more informational. This area in the East Area Plan, they have a lot of flooding problems. So they actually have like a whole sub-chapter dedicated to just how to address flood-prone areas through both environmental quality and infrastructure improvements. And also, I think they even have some stuff about zoning decisions there. And same format for healthy foods, healthcare, and safety. So safety, separately from kind of car crash, road safety, is really crime and like physical community safety. So finally, after we get through all of that, and so again, that's a really, really huge part of the plan. But then we get to chapters for each individual neighborhood. And so here, there's 4 neighborhoods like there are for our plan. And in each of the neighborhoods, what's interesting is that they are all still organized by those 4 main categories that we saw the whole area organized for. So that was land use, economy, mobility, quality of life. So it's kind of like we have like miniatures of the plan within it, but just for each individual neighborhood. So I took Hale as an example, just randomly. The Hale neighborhood, you can see they have a really distinct feature of having right around here and along Colorado, they have that hospital complex down there. They have a bunch of health facilities. So they have a bunch of pages and recommendations that are specific about how the neighborhood wants to interact with the hospitals. how to specifically leverage the hospitals to work with the community on some of the things that they want to see, and then things specifically about parks that they have. So refine suggestions for affordable housing and transit, again, based on just the streets that they have in this neighborhood. So that goes for each individual neighborhood, and that's what those will look like. And then, like I mentioned in the beginning, they have an extra special chapter that is just about Colfax. They have, again, because they're getting bus rapid transit going down there, and there's specific analysis and recommendations about Colfax and about heights and incentive heights. So the ability of maybe some buildings along Colfax to go higher if they provide community benefits like affordable housing and things like that. So they have this whole special chapter devoted to that. And then at the very end, this is really like 3 pages at the end. It's not much, but implementation, it just talks very broadly about kind of what regulatory tools are going to be used to make these policies happen, and how there's regulatory public investment and partnership possibilities for how to realize all of this. So that's the end of the plan. And when I got to that and I got to the last implementation chapter and I saw that it was only 2 pages, that's why I felt something was missing. And I think this is really where that appendix that I showed you in the beginning comes in, because that goes into a lot more detail, which I think is probably what people are really interested too in, rather than these 255 pages of a lot of really overwhelming words, but when are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? Those kind of questions are sort of answered in that matrix. So I think that that'll be a tool to point to going forward too, especially when going through 250 pages can be a little daunting. So that's the end of my PowerPoint. I hope that was useful and we can just start chatting about this. I can stop screen share or look up stuff for people. Maybe I'll just stop screen share now so we can all see each other's faces for a little while. Come on. There we go.
Naomi, I'll go ahead and get the questions and comments started. As I've tried several times to digest both the East Plan and several others, as I said earlier, it was daunting. And I found that I had some frustration because I felt like they had tried to cram so many different kinds of goals and topics and stuff in there that what I, as a layperson, want to get out of a plan is very pragmatic, specific things like, I want to park here. I want this, I want that, or we want this or that. And so what I'm specifically curious about is, will we get the chance to potentially identify locations? One of my hot buttons tends to be green space. Will we get the chance to identify, Quig Newton or Inca Street or any other places where we as a set of residents think greenways or green spaces or parks should be put? Will we be able to be that specific, do you think?
I think so. I'm going to go look in the East Area Plan and see if they did that. So, because they have a whole chapter dedicated to parks, recreation, and open space. And I'm wondering if it does get that specific, or if it is more like we should start a plan, or we should start a process in the future to identify those things. So let me check real quick.
Yeah, that's exactly my concern, is that, especially given the fact that there's money available or that's supposed to be made available for the Parks and Recs department, I don't want us to spend 2 years and then still have further work to do to determine where we'd like to have a park.
Yeah. Oh, okay. They do. Let me share my screen with. This is interesting. This is an interesting page. Let me share my screen. I know, actually, anecdotally, It might not have been about parks, but what's interesting about this is because sometimes you're talking about private property. And I know that they were having conversations with like National Jewish Health, and National Jewish Health was like, don't tell us what to do with our future property. So here's this page. Maybe this is kind of what we were getting at. Open space opportunities. So
Okay.
either for large open space, large campuses, shared open space, maybe publicly accessible spaces near light rail stations. And they overlaid this with, down here it's sort of covered, but the game plan priority area for new parks. So there is this entire plan that is, again, sort of part of Blueprint Denver, but it's the Parks and Rec game plan. And that actually has a lot of specificity about park acquisition. I think it's very confusing that it's its own separate plan.
I hadn't even heard of that one.
Yeah, I will, let's see. I'll send it to you. Or I'll put these things in the chat when we're talking later. So they probably.
Well, that's encouraging. I appreciate your finding that, because even at a quick glance, I can see what you're talking about, that it does at least put some indication of where parks might go.
Yeah, I think that, I also agree that is promising. So I imagine that we'll be doing an exercise like this as well. This seems pretty standard.
Okay.
Anybody else want, since I have my screen up, anybody want to dive in or look for anything else we're curious about?
Naomi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this with us. It's really helpful. I have a question about the policies that end up making the final cut in these plans. What level of consensus is the city looking for from all of the stakeholders, the many stakeholders who are involved?
Great
question.
question.
That is a really good question. I'm not sure I can fully answer it. It's a great question for CPD. What I have heard, and what's been floated, is the idea of searching for consensus. So specifically in the stakeholder committee itself, there's this idea of, consensus defined as you either really support it or you can live with it. So, no one's going to be happy with everything, but as long as you're not adamantly against it, getting to that level of consensus. I think that this is a conversation that is really good to have. And since I don't have clarity on it, obviously it needs further discussion. So I'll bring that up to CPD and ask them what they're, and just interested to hear from you. Do you feel, so there is going to be this formal stakeholder committee, but what do you think is buy-in? Like, we're going to try and reach as many people as possible, of course, but we probably can't talk to every single person within the planning area. But just as an open question, like, what do you think would be appropriate?
Well, I think any policy at any level of government that can get 75% of the stakeholders on board, and you're going to have a loud 12.5% who think that the policy doesn't go far enough, and you're going to have a loud 12.5% that thinks the policy shouldn't go that far. But I mean, that's not a magic number, but I've always felt that's sort of a guiding principle in life, is if you can get 3/4 of the meaningful stakeholders on board, that seems pretty good to get a policy into a planning document like this.
Totally. Well, it's good to hear. I mean, we struggle too. We don't know what the magic number is.
No, we don't have a position at SUNY, obviously, on that either. But
yeah,
I've yet to see anything get 75% of the community on a volunteer basis, unless something's happening in their backyard that they oppose.
We got 75% approval to rezone Sloan's Lake to allow ADUs.
Ooh, okay, that's a real popular thing too.
No, just one issue, and everyone they're like,
let's do ADUs then.
I got close to 90% on the rezoning.
Well, from we can, not
a much smaller piece.
Like,
you mean the 2 blocks? The 2 blocks around the development, the parts.
Right.
Yeah, that we can probably do.
Yeah.
I guess I could refine my response to that. Yeah, it's very difficult to get 75% of people saying, yes, let's do it. But I think if you don't have more than 25% saying don't do it, then that's good. You know?
I would agree with
I'll-
that.
I think that was a good tweak, Phil.
Yeah, correct.
It's interesting looking at this specific map, because there are some terms in here that, I read these documents all the time, and I've not come across half these terms. So I echo
What?
Bill. Well, like the game plan priority area,
Oh, yeah.
right? New park, high, low, and then it's just kind of a broad brush, hitting a bunch of blocks, which most of that is single family residential.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point you bring up. So I've been listening into the West area plan that's going on right now. And, we have a tiny portion of West Colfax that's in it. And they just had a similar discussion with the planners, because they brought a map that was kind of like this to the steering committee, and people really freaked out because it wasn't clear what it was talking about, and they really didn't like the fuzzy borders on things. That felt like it didn't help communicate anything. And also, yeah, I know these are, so I think that these priority areas are talking about where people don't have access in a 10-minute walk to get to a park. But that's not written on here at all. And also, what does that even mean in terms of, like you said, Matt, like this looks like they're trying to take a block of housing and turn it into a park somewhere within this boundary. I don't think that's what they're going to do, but yeah, I'm hoping that they'll be open to feedback like that on just how accessible it is to look at all this information.
Naomi, one of the things that makes looking at the East Area Plan or any of the others a little bit difficult is when you don't live in the area, you don't know it well enough to know the current condition. So it's hard to know what the plan's actually changing because you don't know the current condition very well. But it does feel as though the steering committee is going to be a very crucial body. Does it make any sense? Has there been any consideration to each neighborhood or a neighborhood that might choose to create their own steering committee? Because it feels as though going from a steering committee that's across 4 neighborhoods and having nothing in between that and everybody, 20,000 households, is a big jump. And I'm just throwing out the idea. It just occurred to me. I'd be curious anybody else's comments as to whether, and maybe it just ends up being an informal group because of the fact that the city doesn't want to make it formal.
Yeah, I do know that, so there's only one steering committee.
Right.
It should have around 20 people in it.
Yep.
I do know that there are going to be focus areas or focus groups. Those are topic based, and they're meant to be focused, and they're meant to have subject matter experts in them. And I don't think we've asked them a little bit about, well, how many of those can there be? And are they neighborhood specific? Are they the whole area? And also, I know that they help generate and vet ideas for what'll go in the recommendation. So for instance, like sustainability. I imagine that, we have a sustainability group for the North Side. Like I imagine people from there will be interested, but also other people who are experts are self-interested in that. And they'll have some meetings, some breakout groups that are just about that and come up with recommendations. But kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't know the exact decision-making structure, like how formal are those recommendations that come out of there? And also, I'd be interested to hear, Bill, if you feel like, is that still missing kind of what you were getting at in terms of having like alternate steering committees or other kind of levels of groups that review and engage.
If you're saying that what they call a focus group is different than what I think of as a focus group, I think of a focus group as being a one-time event where some people get together and talk about something for an hour or two. If you're saying that what they've called focus groups, and I have seen that, if those are going to be ongoing meetings for people that care about a particular topic, I think that's a great idea, and that would go a long way to what I think is in my gut that I'm concerned with. Is that their plan? Is that the focus groups will be kind of ongoing entities throughout the process?
I think so. That's the sense that I got.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And just a real quick read of the city planning website alludes to that they've selected a steering committee that is a good broad brush representative of the neighborhood, right? So it hits all of the major corners. And then, yeah, there's focus groups that have an ongoing participation of specific topic, like the detention issue, right? Engineers are going to care about that, but nobody else is. There's a couple of us that will focus in on that whole detention piece, or the parks issue is a great one.
Yeah. And I remember them saying too that they would prefer for the focus groups to not necessarily have steering committee members on them formally. They're open to the public, anybody can go to them, but
Right.
The stakeholder committee members have a strong voice in the stakeholder committee, and these are an opportunity for other people to be involved.
Hey, so this is Tripty. So this whole thing with the steering committee and the focus groups and signing up for this, I think the important piece is, especially with, I think Sunnyside has started kind of developing our own list of people to share with them how they can participate in the steering committee if they're interested, and then also the focus group, because it's the same form, right, that you fill out. And this is the one that the city shared with us originally. It's also in our new share kit, I believe, but it's going to be important to make sure everybody who's interested in being part of this actually knows about that sign up form. And we should probably do that sooner, because I don't know when they're going to close that and start making decisions. Obviously, then they'll keep looking if they can't find people. But I know we've got a good group of people who've signed up for SUNY notifications. I think it's important to let them know that they could be on they could be on the steering committee and on the city's formal focus group. So let's not forget to share, that with the people who have shown interest, period.
Yeah. I'm posting a link in our chat to, this is where you can find all the different plans that are part of, so many different names. This is all Denverite, which was the planning process they went through 3 years ago. So the four plans in that are comp plan, Blueprint Denver, which is the land use plan, the Parks and Recreation plan, and then Denver Moves, which is all about, and then there's like 3 subsets of that for transit, pedestrians, and trails. So yeah.
Naomi, I'm sure the councilwoman is still in listening mode, listening to constituents, but what is she most excited about with the Near Northwest Planning Initiative at this point in time? Any particular subject areas?
Well, both she and I are huge planning and zoning nerds, so I think we'll probably be pretty into that. But we actually just had a conversation that Tripty was on about getting youth involved. And I'm particularly passionate about that. I know Amanda is for sure. So we're really hoping that there will actually be voices from like engaging our schools basically, and getting those voices involved. But in terms of like the sub chapters and stuff, I think probably zoning, affordable housing, what kind of policies we may be able to put in there around that, and kind of land use recommendations, and kind of her forte.
If I could follow up on that, the other question I was going to ask was about affordable housing. I am embarrassed to say I know so little about what the city currently does with respect to affordable housing, what tools it has at its disposal. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for resources that we can look into to better understand the context. And, you know, I want to be an advocate for affordable housing, but I don't know what is a reasonable ask in a policy document like this. I just kind of want to understand what's possible. What's the status quo, and how can we move the ball forward in Sunnyside?
That's a good question that I've also heard a lot, and also maybe is where the plan sort of disappoints in terms of like setting expectations. Because like in the plan will not talk about like how many units at what price level need to go here or there. But there will be things like we could consider incentive zoning, which is, as I mentioned, allowing some benefit to the developer in height or something else in exchange for community benefits. Or saying there might be a policy that says something like, we should focus on building more affordable housing in these specific areas that are near transit or something like that. I know that wasn't exactly your question, but in terms of learning more about affordable housing and development, there's actually a presentation that was hosted by the city kind of recently about this, because the city is going through a affordable housing incentive program exploration thing. And one of the policy researchers that's a contractor for that gave a presentation, I think with Council District 3. So I'll see if I can find the info for that. They did talk a lot about like, what is feasible? What can you ask for? Because, you know, as I'm sure Matt could share, like there are a lot of constraints on how you can actually successfully develop and build something. And I do think that the more you know about like the actual economics of what works and what doesn't helps guide to where can you push, where, you know, where is it really not feasible to put your energy into saying like you should build 100% affordable housing with no incentive or help whatsoever, and exactly like why that's so hard right now. So I'll find that presentation and I'll send it to the group, because I think it's and some other readings. I have a few resources I can try and send you.
That'd be fantastic. Would really appreciate it. Thanks.
And because I know Dennis, I'm going to put him on the spot. Hey, Dennis, I know you've looked at this a lot because of just properties that you have and that you've been considering. And I know workforce housing was kind of near and dear to your heart. I don't know if you can share a little bit about your experience in that, you know, in that zone in terms of, you know, from the developer, what the city offers, what's possible, what's not possible. Maybe you could just kind of highlight just for everybody's, you know, education.
Well, I think that's the biggest reason why I'm on this call today. I mean, we tried to provide some workforce housing over on Inca and we got shot down. So I want to be grassroots and figure out how we get this done, much like Phil. It's very important and near and dear to my heart. The problem is that, you know, a 2x4 costs $8 today, which used to cost $4 a couple months ago. So construction costs have gone up out of the roof. Hopefully, you know, we see some prices going down, but I mean, you got to look at an area like Inca and you have to say, okay, how do we incentivize people to build affordable housing? You know, the ground is only so big. And I think, you know, just in my experience, the only way that I've seen it done in different cities is you have to allow people to build density and then require them to build that affordable housing. So like an initiative that says, if you build affordable housing, we'll give you 12 stories. Or if you build affordable housing, we will fast track your permitting. You know, I mean, I have a lot of developer friends that I talk to, and, you know, the biggest thing is time. We're fighting time. So if we can figure out how to shorten that time frame to get a shovel in the ground, that's probably incentive enough for some developers to say, okay, we'll go ahead and do it. So that's just been my experience over the last 15 years trying to build stuff in different neighborhoods. So,
Hey, Dennis, thank you. Those are great comments. Thanks for being on the call, and please, I think you'd be a really important ingredient over the next 18 months. I hope you really stay actively involved.
I'm 100% in.
Yeah. And so yeah, like that those conversations, and also about so much of it is related to things that are very unfortunately very outside of our control, like the cost of materials and supply chain and just, I mean, large real estate trends and just how freaking expensive land is in Denver right now. So those are things that are being thought of at like a citywide level, like that affordable housing zoning incentive program that Amanda's actually, she sits on that, and they're just kicking it off again. But what we can do in Sunnyside too is to think about like what Dennis was saying. How might this look? What are these possible solutions that are out there, and how might that look in Sunnyside? So are there places where we could say, go up to 12 stories if you can do this affordable housing? Where could we accommodate 12 stories? Or, you know, what are the other ways to get more affordable housing that's not necessarily larger development projects, like allowing ADUs? Or I know something that has come up a lot is what to do with very large lots. And do we need these gigantic single unit lots? Should we divide them? No, it's a really good question. Like that's what the NPI should be talking about. So yeah, those are the kind of things that could go in there.
So let's run, if we could run with this example a little bit. So if we get feedback that we're looking for workforce or affordable housing within Sunnyside, we can state that as one of the main objectives, or that the community would like. And then the city would work with us as far as how we might make sure that happens, incentivize it in the way that we would say, okay, along Inca Street, it's currently, and I'm just going to throw this out, zoned for only 8 stories. However, if you provide 25% affordable housing per our NPI, you would be able to build up to 12 stories, for instance. That's a type of concrete thing that we could get into place in this NPI.
Yeah, more or less. I think it would be phrased in words like heights of up to 12 stories may be appropriate. So again, it's a little fuzzy.
Yeah. So
Why maybe? Why did you add maybe?
Because the actual enabling zoning and legislation would still need to be created, because the plan doesn't do that. So like an overlay or an incentive overlay or a citywide policy would need to be created that's not being created by the plan. The plan is providing guidance and kind of enabling that to happen. But it would have a separate, very specific process just focused on that topic to actually enact it. Matt, did you have something?
yeah, so I mean, I think this is one of the tricky things. Is one of the things that this document does is it takes the last 20 years worth of documents that we have for all these different areas within the West and the near Northwest, and it combines it into a single source. So that's one of the big overarching efforts of this whole remap the Denver. The other big thing is it does not change zoning map. You still have to do that through a rezoning or, as Naomi said, a legislative. One strategy that could be employed is if the city wants the plan in place, but if there's already adopted plans that say this area should have more density because of affordable housing, the neighborhood, the RNO, could start that process concurrent with this planning based on the older plans. And so that when the adoption of this comes out, you could also start that or already be down the road of that legislative process. And that's a way to not lose the 2 years. The city's going to want this plan in place to guide the bigger picture conversation, but that
it would still go to the BOA for a variance to get a height restriction rate.
It has to go to council.
Yeah, it would go as a rezoning and it would get shot down because there's no specific, unless there is, but
unless this was in place.
Well, that's where that broad brush of overlays is is starting to be applied a little bit better around the city. So say around some of the light rail stations.
Yep.
We have already started to create an overlay that addresses additional height allowable. So that could be a process that comes with this whole effort.
Well, and you have the overlay process, and you also have the legislative rezoning. And Naomi, I don't want to put words in yours or Councilwoman Sandoval's mouth, but my belief is that, for instance, in the station area, if it becomes clear over the next year during the NPI process that the neighborhood strongly supports legislative rezoning in the station area, from discussions previously, Amanda's not opposed to that. She's willing to work with us on that.
So, I think, I don't know, not too long ago, Naomi, it might be in you might remember, I was asking about this piece specifically, saying along Inca, one of the challenges that some of the developers have, and I think a lot of the community supports the higher density, and with this trade-off, right, for affordable housing, why couldn't we just rezone that area? And Bill, I think you were around, but I'm not sure, Espinoza had actually started drawing some maps saying, along this line in this center, we go up to 12 with these kind of incentives. And then we start, staggering down as we get closer to the single family, and then we go down, And when I was talking about the rezoning, because I think we all most people want this, but I don't think there's that guidance, right, from the city or policy that would allow this to just happen. Amanda's thought was, yes, that's one way to do it, but then does the neighborhood residents want to give up the potential for negotiation if we legislatively rezone to 8 stories or something like that? So I think that was I get that, but that was kind of what she was saying, that we want to think about what we're giving away and, and what we're doing there. So it was interesting to think of it that way.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. The thinking on that is that unless we have a really strong incentive, and it would be like an incentive overlay. There is one that exists in the entire city, and it's the 38th and Blake station area incentive overlay, and it has not worked. It has not produced any, I think, or very few.
And it's really been financing.
Yeah, and it's
for many
reasons.
These buildings, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's so that's why we're so cautious about, because we would need to develop our own incentive overlay or tweak that or put the work in, which this committee is already doing citywide, to really figure out what is actually going to work, what is attractive enough, and what will actually deliver units. And it's unfortunately rather long, hard process. So that's kind of why, rather than just doing the rezoning, like you were saying, correct, we do have this opportunity to negotiate a little bit with rezonings. I would like to call out Esteban. I don't know how, have you guys interacted much before? Have you talked with Sunny? Oh, you're muted.
I was teaching today earlier, so I've been to a couple of meetings when they were in person, but this is my first online version or online virtual meeting. But yeah, everyone, my name is Esteban Gomez. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Denver. Just looking at, I live in Sunnyside and been doing research on the impacts of TOD in Denver and other places. So yeah. Pleasure to meet you all.
Shout out.
Welcome.
Esteban is a fantastic resource, and really, in fact, we were actually talking about you, all good things, and really about interacting with the students and youth, getting them involved. And so Amanda's going to send you an email, by the way.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've done filmmaking workshops at North High School. One of the main priorities there has been to encourage students to think about development, design, and just kind of like thinking about some of how these policies might impact their everyday lives. So,
Mhm.
so again, my work there at North High School was temporarily put on hold because of COVID. But hopefully when we go back there in next year, we can kind of restart that program of, again, getting students engaged with their local communities.
And everyone knows that I'm an opportunist when it comes to people in the neighborhood who want to get engaged. So Esteban, I've already offered, please, if you want to get involved, volunteer with us, join our board, come to our meetings. We welcome your input and anything you want to give towards the organization. Thank you.
Great, yeah, happy to do so.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'd be
My daughter is going to be at North next year, so I'm looking forward to her getting a new class.
Okay. Well, I think if they welcome me back, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure they will. It's a great organization.
Yeah. I'm gonna call you out, Matt. He gave a presentation, a really great presentation to the WeCan people about that development on 17th and Sheridan. You have great skills in communicating bulk plane and like complex zoning topics. And so you've been keeping this secret that you're really good at communicating.
I've had a long career working within the planning and zoning department. One of my first projects was actually the 15th and Little Raven high-rise tower there. And so I got involved with it, and it was really developer-led. But I've obviously everything I do touches some form of planning and zoning or building department. And I've learned that being able to how to take some really complex and dense material and synthesize it in a way that's digestible is I'm getting better with it. I haven't learned how to completely convince people to go that direction after my statements, but I need to work on that part.
It was compared to other presentations that I've seen, specifically that project, but also others, like people got it. And so I wanted to bring that up just to say, like, we've got some really great resources in Sunnyside. And I don't want to volunteer you, Matt, but it's really awesome to know that, in terms of helping people understand like what bulk plane is and these kind of larger concepts is really tricky, and we're probably going to need to use all our strength in those areas over the next 2 years.
Well, I kind of agree with Bill. I take a more proactive approach to it, where if you can get some consent with Phil's 25%, we'll get them on board and rally the rest of the troops. Being able to take sites like Quig Newton and really think about the master plan of that thing, not just in how it functions as 5, 6, 8 blocks, but what does that impact to the lower half of SUNY, the transportation networks? That there's a lot of really cool ability to, and not push an agenda, but move us forward. We gotta progress. Density is the only way you're gonna get more affordable housing is build more housing. It's the only way.
Hey, Matt, you don't live in Sunnyside, do you?
I don't. I live in the west neighborhood, or no, west. Was it far west?
Okay, I know, because I'm like, what? You lived in Sunnyside and I haven't hit you up already?
No. I'm de facto into your neighborhood.
I know. So yeah. So Matt, you've got some projects where you're the architect, I believe, right? In Sunnyside. So certainly you have interest in Sunnyside, probably along with other places, but especially through your client and stuff that you're working on.
Yes, but at the same time, I do live here. I travel up and down 38th.
That's true.
Every day. So it's not, to me, I'm looking at this as more like the West area plan that you're working on, Naomi. We actually just met with Eugene yesterday and had a great conversation with him, and I'm wishing him luck to get that one done.
Yeah,
he's pushing hard. but
Yeah.
it is a big process. I mean, you got to bring a lot of people together and really be able to tell a big story very at their level.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can use your help. So, you know,
That's why I'm here.
all right. Thank you so much.
Well,
I have one question. I know it's getting late here, but Naomi, can you, what is the role of a registered neighborhood organization in the neighborhood planning initiative? You know, our bylaws say that everyone in Sunnyside is a member of SUNI. We have a very small portion of that who are paying members who are active. What authority do we have to speak to these issues, and what's our role in getting people engaged? I'm just trying to understand the bigger picture of what role RNOs play in a neighborhood planning initiative.
I'll say the most formal role is that you have a dedicated spot on the steering committee for, I think 2, maybe 1, but I think it's 2 members, or at least a representation on the steering committee. And then beyond that, I think that I'm not sure if I can give a really solid answer. I think it's kind of ideally it is helping get as many voices as possible. And I'm hoping, and I think you guys too hope that through this process, people get involved with SUNY going forward, that this is an opportunity to get people to understand how much this RNO and city things in general impact their lives. But it's an interesting question in terms of like formal commitment. There's not a formal commitment. Really, the only thing is that you have seats on the steering committee. The rest is kind of up to us.
Actually, so on our last call with the city, I mean, and I don't know if have you placed their presentation into that near Northwest?
This one I just gave?
The one that was just the last meeting we just had on the 21st.
Oh, from the CPD one. No, I'll have to ask them for their slides.
Only because I want to say that one of the things, at least as I recall from that conversation, was, you know, the communication and dissemination of information is the really, really big part, right, of what the RNO does and why we are getting, you know, we're connected through the planning department and why the RNO gets emails for every variance and every rezoning. But I mean, Phil, your bigger question about, like, you know, how much authority we have or don't have or what we can do, not do, the city purposefully does not dictate those things because they want us to have autonomy and they want us to, you know, do what the community wants. I think your question on how the community, what the RNO should do, is probably better asked to the community about what they want our role to be or not to be. But the city, at least through their RNO legislation, likes to be vague purposefully.
Yeah.
But on NPI, you know, one of the things they said they would absolutely need us for is the dissemination of information, get the word out, aggregate people, bring them into the conversation. And obviously that is one thing we do try to do all around. But, you know, authority, I don't know, you know, what that would mean and what they would even tell us what that means.
I guess I'm just trying to determine whether our primary and or sole role is to facilitate and communicate and engage, or if there's any reason for the RNO to take a position on various policy issues that will be up for debate as in the context of NPI. And that's kind of taking it to a next step, but I don't know if that's an appropriate role for an RNO to take, especially one, like I said, you know, we've got so many members, we can't speak for
No, absolutely.
the average Sunnyside resident.
And
at the very end of the process, whether or not when the plan like actually gets to city council adoption, whether or not the RNO formally supports it at that point is important. But if you're talking about
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I would like Harkness Heights, right? We've got a very active membership. We're a much smaller little section of an RNO that is actually encompassed by the Berkeley RNO run. So, you know, you'll find these little smaller RNOs that have a very myopic view of here's my 20 blocks. And we're a very forward pushing one that we're actually writing an overlay on. I won't say the word, but it reduces the bulk and mass of buildings within our neighborhood. So it's actually changing the zoning map to put that overlay in. So RNOs have the ability to be both proactive and that, you know, dissemination of information, like Trupti said. The steering committee is the one that kind of has the vote, from my understanding, right, Naomi?
That is my understanding as well. Yeah.
And I will say that the city has not given us, and Naomi, you can tell me otherwise because I don't know, but the city hasn't given us a really good, this is what the steering committee does and doesn't do, the roles and responsibilities, like sign up to be on it, but it's like you don't quite know exactly what you're committing to other than expect meetings and some time, but they haven't really told us, you know, I wonder if, and actually maybe we can do this, if it would be helpful, Bill, James, and PCD, we could probably get people from another steering committee, maybe East Area or one of these approved ones that have gone through the process to come and share their experience of what the steering committee, you know, role look like, because I'd be interested, but I don't know what it entails. It's kind of like that. So, and I haven't heard from the city yet. Really good. Maybe it'll come out in the next month, but.
I share that frustration. I think it's, and through watching the West Area Plan, me and my District 3 counterparts, the aides there, we are all like messaging each other and talking about our takeaways from it. And I think they share that frustration as well, and that it's very fuzzy. And we pushed for the West Area Plan actually to have probably more of a structure for their steering committee than the other plans have. The idea that there's kind of a code of conduct and even a charter, you know, like an actual formalized like list of these are my responsibilities. Also, if I do this, I might get kicked out because like we all need to get along and be productive. I know that Amanda and I have had conversations with the city about that. We also have not yet gotten, you know, solid answers, but we'll continue to push that, because I think you're right, Trupti. Like how do you put out a job application for a job that doesn't have a description, really, other than that you're going to meet every month for the next 2 years?
Trupti, it's meeting every day, 2 hours for 2 years.
That sounds like a job for the unemployed person that I am.
Yeah.
At least that's what Amanda is telling people.
That's Naomi's job. I mean, she's gonna sit through every one of these meetings.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
she gets paid. I hope.
No, but it's actually your job. Like that's.
Yeah.
No, that would be really helpful, because, you know, one of the things is like really trying to find, you know, steering committee people, like people with some level of expertise. Like for me, I'm thinking about like, you know, people in the advocacy space, maybe people who, you know, they are going to bring something that I couldn't, or I'm not even talking about me, or somebody else, you know, on this call couldn't. So it's like, you know, that was my question about composition and, you know, what are we trying to get? What's that ideal, you know, group of steering committee? It has this, and this, you know, ideally even. Forget the fact it's a volunteer thing, but ideally even.
Yeah. Good questions. Well, we'll definitely, and you know, when we have our further kind of RNO leadership meetings with CPD, like can continue to ask them this if I don't get the answers beforehand, if we don't talk beforehand about this. I think I've found it frustrating that there's not a lot of solid answers to questions. But I also think things are going to work out. So I'll balance
Optimist. So do you think it would be helpful to get folks from a different steering committee who went through the process from the beginning and the end, who also are not pissed off, so that they kind of, yes, I know.
I was like, it depends on who you want to talk to. I think it could certainly be useful. I think you will get very different opinions on how things went. So let me float that and ask too, like, I don't know, who would be the most, might be some good reason to actually ask CPD, since they were in all those meetings. They probably have an idea of who seemed the most like even keel.
Or they can come and tell us what this is all about. I mean, that to
I
me
think
is
it would
the
be good.
best.
I think it'd be good to talk to someone who wasn't CPD, who was actually in the trenches. I support that. But I think that they would have, because like Cortland and Liz, like because they worked on it. These other plans. So they were with the steering committee. So I think we'll have to select that person very carefully, but it could be
Also Eugene. Eugene may know too, because he's gone through a plan that's been completed already.
Yes,
he may know a person who would be the right fit, and he also knows us here and our RNO, so he may be able to find someone.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, Bill or James, if you guys want to reach out to Eugene, or if you want me to reach out to Eugene to ask if we can find someone with that experience and background to come and talk to us on another call or next PCD or something, if there's room, let me know.
Nice. And yeah, I would be prepared. I mean, I'd be prepared for them. Maybe they would like a very private conversation. I don't know. You know, there could be sensitivities there. They'd be happy to talk to you, but maybe not like
in public
at a public meeting. So
that's being recorded.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. I gotta go eat dinner.
You.
Great to see y'all.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.